The New Orleans Saints have a plethora of young talent, but there are a couple that are ready to make their second-year leaps into stardom. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, you can subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss the latest episodes. And if you want to continue the conversation with me one-on-one, you can head over to joinsubtext.com/lockedonsaints so you can chat with me one-on-one, all of that good stuff, as well as take in our film studies, all that. As always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media. You can find me as the senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site covering the New Orleans Saints, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs can help you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free over at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, we are taking a look at some of the biggest questions like we do every Monday. And of course, I have my bold prediction for you as well. My bold prediction, I'll tell you right now, is that the defense scores touchdowns sometime within the first two games. But who is where my bold prediction comes in? We'll take a look at that. We're also going to take a look at whether or not there are any extensions that the New Orleans Saints can take a look at before, I'm saying take a look at a lot, can potentially pursue ahead of a week one. That's one of the biggest questions around the Saints right now, especially around one particular player. But first, I want to dive in on second-year players for the New Orleans Saints that have a major ability to be able to take a step forward. We hear a lot about the sophomore slump in the NFL. We might have witnessed that a little bit with cornerback Paulson Adebo last year for the Saints, for instance, who was dealing with injury and all these other things and kind of underwhelmed and underperformed in terms of what his own expectations were, as well as what people saw his rookie season. So sometimes that happens, but other times players make a big positive leap in their second year. We've certainly seen that in New Orleans before. We saw that with Michael Thomas. We saw that with Alvin Kamara and others. So who are the players that could make that second year leap for the New Orleans Saints? Well, there's a few, but there's two in particular that I'm focused on that can not only just make the leap into, another level of play, but could potentially make the leap into stardom and recognition. That's wide receivers Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Both these guys, first of all, play the right position for this, right? Like there's certain positions that have maybe a better opportunity to be able to jump into the stardom category. Quarterback is absolutely that. Running back can be that. Certainly wide receiver is that. And these are two guys that have the exact type of skill sets that you want to see at the wide receiver position that give them the opportunity to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Transcend just New Orleans Saints stardom and into NFL stardom. And a lot of that comes from the deep shots, the run after catch ability, the speed, the good hands, the route running, all of those things. And we're seeing and have seen better and better and better from these guys all throughout their rookie seasons, as well as all throughout OTAs and minicamp. Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed were the stars of minicamp. Now, unfortunately, they both started to deal with some injuries. You had a calf injury for one, you had a groin injury for the other. And so I think that that's something that maybe you get a little bit concerned about. I completely understand that, especially considering the Saints' recent history with injuries. But we'll see how guys like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed look during training camp. Maybe they're able to get past it. But you think about the things that make wide receivers jump off the screen, and it's the deep ball, it's the contested catch, it's the run after catch, the making people miss after the catch, all those things. And each of these guys have their own versions of that. Chris Olave, who had only a 33.3% contested catch rate last year, according to Pro Football Focus, he caught only 8 of his, what would that be, 24 contested catch opportunities. Went into the offseason at 187, came out of the offseason at 192 in terms of weight, trying to get up to 195. And we saw him go up there and make 2 big contested catches throughout OTAs and mini camps. And you already know that he's a deep ball guy, over 14 yards when it came to average depth of target. And that was with Andy Dalton. Derek Carr is top 10 in completions of 20 yards or more in the last 3 seasons in the NFL. So there's an easy sort of match for you there. And that same match of the deep threat and all that obviously goes for Rashid Shaheed. But you look at his ability to make people miss tackles and all of those other things as well. I mean, you saw that in the Bengals game. You saw that in the Arizona Cardinals game. You've seen it with him as a returner during his time at Weber State when he was playing in college in Utah. There's all of those examples for both of those guys. So they are absolutely ready to make that leap into stardom. Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed should be able to stamp their tickets as stars if they stay healthy this year in the NFL. Let's take a look at some of the other candidates because the Saints have some. Just sticking to the guys that are going into their second year who have taken the field with this team last year, Trevor Penning, Lewis Kidd, as well as Alontae Taylor need to be on that list. We could add Nico Lalos there. He got a little bit of playing time and stuff, but he was mostly a practice squad guy. Don't worry, I'm going to come back to DeMarco Jackson, and it is, of course, Smoke Monday. Sources say that Smoke Monday woke up on a Monday. We're doing great out here. So when we look at the guys that have seen the field, Trevor Penning is one that has an easy trajectory to make a big leap just because he only started 1 game at his intended position, missed the first 12. Now he gets the opportunity to come in. He's expected to be ready to go for camp. We'll see if that's really the case or if it's a ramp up situation at the beginning of camp. But one way or another, he's expected to be the starter at left tackle week 1. So he's immediately going to be able to make that leap because he's going to be asked to. It'll be effectively his first year leap in a way. But he did play well in that final game against the Carolina Panthers. We're going to do a full film study on that game and Trevor Penning over for subtext. So you know where to find all of that. But yeah, he's a guy that's easily got the opportunity to be able to make that leap. Alontae Taylor, far and away an option too. You might even lump him in with Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed as potential for stardom. He's just got to win that cornerback 2 spot, or the Saints have to just rotate him in quite a bit, which could be a way that the Saints could go. It's not necessarily that one guy wins and one guy loses. It's that what's the matchup for the physical type of wide receiver or the shifty type of wide receiver, or the speedy type of wide receiver that's on that side of the field, and how do you mix and match on a weekly basis with those 2 guys? There's an opportunity there. And if the Saints did that, then it does give Alontae Taylor the opportunity to make that leap into stardom. Lewis Kidd is a really interesting one. I don't think he's going to make a leap into stardom, but he could make a leap, especially if the Saints deal with more injuries on the interior. Him and Nick Saldiveri are both guys to watch should an injury happen at left guard or right guard to potentially step in, become starters, and see what happens from there. DeMarco Jackson, Smoke Monday. Hard to talk about them taking a second-year leap because they didn't get a first year, but it's clear that they're going to have roles on this Saints defense as well as on this Saints special teams units during training camp in the preseason. DeMarco Jackson, I think, has the easier path to the roster than Smoke Monday. DeMarco Jackson's just higher up on the list at his position, whereas Smoke Monday is in a very crowded position full of veterans, which is not a gap that or a hurdle that DeMarco Jackson has to leap at all. So I think that, you lean a little bit more towards DeMarco Jackson, but Smoke Monday's skill set, his attitude, his energy, all of those things are going to help him stand out during training camp. So I think that they both have a real shot here to make the roster. I just think that one of them's got a little bit of a head start in terms of the responsibilities that he's being taught, and that's DeMarco Jackson. So could be an opportunity for him to take a leap in his second year, even though his first year was effectively a wash because he was on injured reserve. He wasn't able to play. So any playing time would be a leap from where he was year 1. But I do think that there will be a role for him as the backup guy, potentially behind Demario Davis and Pete Werner as the off-ball coverage linebacker, while Zack Baun, I guess, handles the strong side, Caden Ellis role, third linebacker role, not the Caden Ellis role, the third linebacker role, which will have some of those Caden Ellis specials in there. So lots of opportunity for both of those guys, as well as some of the other guys that are coming in that are still in their second year in the NFL, but didn't spend last year with the New Orleans Saints. But those are the ones that make the most sense, ready to make those leaps, especially Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Trevor Penning, and Alontae Taylor for sure. Those 4 guys have a real opportunity ahead of them. speaking of opportunities ahead of players, there could be some potential extensions that the Saints look to get done before week one, or even as we've seen it in the locker room after week one sometimes. So we'll take a look at that and who those couple of players are, especially one that should be in line for an extension this offseason. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. We've all used LinkedIn to find a job, but if you're looking to hire somebody, LinkedIn Jobs is there for you as well, even as a hiring person. So if you're looking at trying to find the right person that's 100%, that you're 100% certain about, that's a fit for your culture, that has all the knowledge and requisite experience that you're looking for, LinkedIn Jobs makes it super easy. There's so many boxes to check with these high stakes hires, and LinkedIn makes it super easy to check all of those boxes. So go and check them out today, LinkedIn Jobs, and they're going to help you find the right people for your team fast. And here's the key, for free. You're able to add that purple hashtag hiring frame to your profile photo. You can use screening questions. They're number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again to all the everydayers out there for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. We'll be right back at you with another episode tomorrow. It's Tuesday, so we're gathering up some of your questions. I'll go to Subtext, Facebook. I'll go to Twitter if Twitter will allow us to see anything these days. We'll get through some of your questions after I get done going through all of my biggest questions for today. So it's kind of how we're splitting it up. Monday, biggest questions that I'm looking at. Tuesday, your questions. So we'll get to all that in tomorrow's episode. So I want to take a look here at potential extensions that could be on the way for the New Orleans Saints. And we've seen this for the past couple of years. They extended Demario Davis after week one, or really the news broke during the week one game against the Raiders a few years ago. Or was that the week two game against the Raiders a few years ago? But anyway, it was early on in the season. It was a couple games in, and it broke during the newscast. A couple of years ago as well, they opened up the season against the Green Bay Packers in Jacksonville. Marshall Lattimore has this incredible game against Davante Adams. The Saints defense has this incredible game against Aaron Rodgers, 38-3 victory. Marshall Lattimore breaks his hand and then goes and signs a contract after the game, which is still one of my favorite moments. So there's lots of cool stuff that happens sometimes with these extensions and all. And so I'm just kind of curious about whether or not some of those might be on the way this season. And there's three key candidates, rather, when it comes to potential extensions. The most important extension the New Orleans Saints can land before the season is extending Cameron Jordan and thereby making sure that he finishes his career here in New Orleans. That's the number one most important extension that the Saints could get done this offseason. Cam deserves to finish his career as a New Orleans Saint. The Saints want Cam to finish his career as a New Orleans Saint. Cam wants to finish his career as a New Orleans Saint. It's all there. All parties agree that this should happen. Fans, the organization has been open about it. Mickey Loomis talked about it on the radio with our partners over at SiriusXM. Cam has told us, he has told me to my face, he has told everybody in the media room to their face over and over again that he wants to end his career as a New Orleans Saint. He wants to be a lifer. The three things he said he wanted to do is that he wanted the franchise sack record, he wants to finish his career with the New Orleans Saints, and he wants a Super Bowl. And he could get the second out of the three of those before, because he's already got the sack record, 115.5. Shout out to you, Cam. You're the sack leader for the New Orleans Saints. He's also the tackle for a loss leader for the franchise as well in a career. I think it's 130 tackles for a loss, something like that. But he's got that. He can get the extension, and then the next thing is to win the Super Bowl. And if you ask Cam, he's saying, stamp the ticket to Vegas. We'll see you there in 2024. So, obviously that's a huge one that the New Orleans Saints could pull off, and it would be the right thing to do. Beyond any of the football talk in terms of, production on the field or anything like that. Look at what this guy does in the community. He spends every off day, which is supposed to be Tuesday, he spends every off day out there in the community, working with kids and building up the place that he considers his home, the city of New Orleans. And so it's pretty cool. It's excellent. And I think that getting that contract done with Cam would be such a good solidifying move. And another example of the stability of the New Orleans Saints organization in terms of their ability to make the right decisions with these contracts, even though sometimes they have to make hard decisions with these contracts. But there's nothing here. There's no off-field stuff. There's no on-field concerns. There's nothing like that. There's nothing complicated about this decision. So that's the most important one that they can get done. But there are two other candidates as well. And I'll be curious to see how the Saints handle this one. Or handle both of these. I don't know that both of these happen, but Carl Granderson, I think, deserves an extension. New Orleans Saints defensive end, very likely to be the guy at the beginning of the season to get the first snap opposite Cam Jordan at edge. And then the other one is Zack Baun. That's really interesting. Like, Zack Baun kind of has to earn it first, right? Like, he hasn't gotten really any opportunity to rush the passer, which is the reason why he was a draft prospect in the first place. Since he showed up in New Orleans, it's been all about off ball, off ball, off ball. But now you're starting to see him play a little bit more of an on-ball role. He's a strong side linebacker. He's usually the third linebacker that's out on the field when it's Demario Davis and Pete Werner, all throughout like mini camps and OTAs and stuff like that. We'll see if that persists throughout the offseason, throughout training camp, into the season, everything. But it just feels like that one doesn't feel very likely. Like, what feels more likely with Zack Baun is that his rookie deal expires after this year. Maybe they see some things that they like out of him this season, and then they sign him to a 1-year deal in 2024. Like, that's what feels most likely when it comes to Zack Baun. But Carl Granderson's a guy that makes a lot of sense. 5.5 sacks last year, has gotten better and better every season. The numbers continue to tick up as well, as a whole, right? As a whole. And he's also got a $4.1 million cap hit going into the season, and a good like 3.4 of it or so is all base salary. So there's a lot of opportunity for the Saints to be able to re-sign him and maybe even drop his cap hit and open up even more spending potential for this season. Or just make sure that you're in a situation to where you're not in a Trey Hendrickson deal again, to where you have a real opportunity to re-sign early, get things done, do the Herb Jones, just like the Pelicans just did, right? They declined the option and then they got the extension done. A little bit more costs control, a little bit more of a cheaper deal based on that. Jake Madison did a fantastic breakdown of why it was the right move over at Locked On Pelicans the other day. You can go check that out. But you could do the same thing with Carl Granderson, because the other deal is that you have a Trey Hendrickson situation to where he goes out here in 2024 or 2023 and ends up with 13.5 sacks. And then now he's getting big money somewhere else. Get that extension done now if you can. And this is where, like, look, Carl Granderson and his representation might be smart enough to say, no, we don't want an extension right now, right? This is both ways. It's not just that the team goes to you and says, hey, Carl, you're extended. Here's your new contract. It's a negotiation. It's all these other things. So what would make a lot of sense is if the Saints were saying, hey, no, let's extend him now and like, let's get this done early. But then Carl Granderson and his team are like, no, let's wait and see how 2023 goes. I've got more opportunity. I'm going to get more snaps. I'm going to be a greater focal point. I'm going to have a lot of, hopefully, one-on-one opportunities because of the double teams that we should be able to gather in the interior now. So I'm going to wait. And I'm going to see how 2023 goes. I'm making a good $3 million this year. I'm Gucci. Let me see what happens going into 2024. That might be the case. But if the Saints are able to get an extension done with Carl Granderson before the season starts here in 2023, that would be a huge win for them, because who knows what his production level is going to look like in 2023. But you're not paying for the potential. You're going to be paying a contract that's based on what he's done so far. So that works in your advantage for right now. You'd have to pay up a little bit for the potential, but not as much as you'd have to pay if he goes out there and has double-digit sacks here in 2023, and then you're stuck twiddling your thumbs going, man, wish we would have gotten that done sooner in 2024. That's not all on New Orleans, but if they can convince them to get it done, then they should. So Carl Granderson, Cam Jordan are easy picks. Zack Baun's an interesting one. I don't see it happening, but he's somebody that you could extend. And there are some others as well, but those three feel like the most likely of the three to get all of that done before this season. Coming up next, I'm going to tell you which player I think scores the first defensive touchdown for the New Orleans Saints for our bold prediction segment to wrap up the show. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with our look at my bold prediction. Though I did forget one point in the last piece talking about Carl Granderson. I mentioned that he's due $4.1 million this year in terms of a cap hit, and a large portion of that is base salary. The reason why I highlight that is because the Saints can adjust that if they get an extension done. So part of the extension could be giving a larger signing bonus so he gets more money up front, quote unquote. But you can structure it in such a way that it carries a lesser cap hit than what his current 2023 is. So there's some things that they could do with that to actually save themselves a little bit more money too. So I want to make sure that I kind of mentioned that, but I didn't break it down the way that I should have. So now I want to take a look at our bold prediction here. We do this every Monday to wrap up Monday's shows over the course of the offseason, which, look, y'all, there's 3 more Mondays after this, and then all of a sudden we're in a training camp. That's pretty dope. I'm very excited about that. I said that so quietly and so like ASMR for you because I know how romantic it is to say football's almost back. Ladies and gentlemen, football is almost back. All right, so let's take a look at bold prediction for the New Orleans Saints. So I'm looking at the New Orleans Saints and I'm going, you know what? Okay, this is a team. This is a team that didn't do very well in turning the ball over, enforcing turnovers last year. On the defensive side, franchise low in terms of takeaways and things like that. Only walked away with, 7 interceptions. You had guys like Daniel Sorensen and Tyrann Mathieu who combined for 4 alone. So if you didn't have on your bingo card that, Daniel Sorensen would be tied for most interceptions in the New Orleans Saints defense last year, I don't blame you. I didn't have that on my bingo card either, but that's certainly not on your bingo card for this year. A, Daniel Sorensen's not on the roster anymore, but also B, you're expecting more from this team going into 2023, especially the secondary, takeaways, all of those things. So I completely understand all that. And I vibe with all that because I think that's right. But I do think that there is going to be a massive, I don't want to say a massive, because we're also seeing like interceptions go down across the NFL as a whole. People leading the NFL in interceptions now aren't 20 plus interceptions anymore. They're 14, 15, 16, 17 interceptions now. Those are the guys that are now leading the league in the stats. So I'm not going to say there's going to be a massive uptick, but you do expect an uptick because there's really nowhere to go but up in terms of where the Saints were in interceptions last year. And a part of that, I think, is that within the first 2 weeks, we already start to see it, right? Saints coming up with multiple turnovers in week 1 against the Titans. I could see it. Coming up with multiple turnovers week 2. I could see it. So there's the opportunity there. I think one of those goes back for a touchdown. And not only just one of those, but I think it's a pick 6 by New Orleans Saints cornerback Alontae Taylor. Now, you might hear me say that, and then you go, hey, wait a minute. That means you think that Alontae Taylor wins the CB2 battle. Not necessarily. Look, I do think that there's a reality in which we see both of these guys all throughout the season. Rotated based upon matchup, down and distance, situation, type of receiver, archetype of the receiver that's across from all those other things. I think the Saints can get really creative there, and I think that it would be worth their time to do that. They did it last year. They did it with Bradley Roby and Justin Evans early in the season in the slot. They've done it in the past with guys like Paulson Adebo and Bradley Roby on the outside during Paulson Adebo's first season. So, you can mix and match based upon what your matchup is going to be, game situation, down and distance, all that other stuff. And so I think that maybe that's the way that New Orleans ends up going, at least early on in the season, that maybe you don't really get a winner out of training camp at that position, but instead you get winners, right? And that's the New Orleans Saints because they've got 2 great corners that they can deploy however they want now. And so I look at Alontae Taylor, who had so many opportunities for interceptions last year that either, wasn't able to come up with the catch or were taken away from him. San Francisco 49ers game, Atlanta Falcons game. Like there were a couple of those. And some of them were, penalties on other sides of the defense. Some of it was, I still have a little bit of, and you could tell me, like, I still have a little bit of trouble with that Atlanta Falcons one because it still felt like that was inbounds to me, but maybe I am wrong on that. But anyway, it was another just close call for him in terms of getting another interception. And in 2023, I think that working on his hands is a big part of what will help that. But I also think that at some point, like the luck's just got to go the other way. So I think Alontae Taylor on a pick 6 scores the first defensive touchdown for the New Orleans Saints in 2023. That's the bold prediction. I don't think it's the only defensive touchdown that the Saints have this year, though, because they are going up against a bunch of teams that are going to look to run the ball. And they're going to look to run the ball in precarious situations if the Saints punting is on point, if the Saints special teams coverage is on point, and all of those other things. So they could end up running in some of these precarious situations where their back's against the wall. And, you've got the Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, Cordell Patterson combination of the Atlanta Falcons. You've got the Derrick Henry, Tajay Spears combination of the Tennessee Titans. You have some of these run-heavy teams that, if things are going right, you're putting them in back against the wall type situations. And everyone should be going for the ball in those cases, because you get that ball on the ground, then all of a sudden you have a scoop and score touchdown. So my other one that I'm thinking about is, and I'd love to see it happen exactly just all over again. Week 13 against the Detroit Lions, Cam Jordan recovers a fumble in the end zone, scores a touchdown. Because we've seen Cam Jordan do this before. It was against Matt Stafford years ago in what was one of the greatest and most fun / most anxiety formulating games ever, outside of maybe the New York Giants game, where they each threw, 19 touchdowns, him and, Drew Brees and Eli Manning. But I do think that that's another game where you could potentially see something go in the Saints' favor with all the changes on offense. Jared Goff's kind of a goof and all these other things. Like, there's these opportunities to be able to create those moments for you to be able to recover a fumble in the end zone and score a touchdown. Like, I could see those things happening again. So I think, like, the overall bold prediction, though, is that Alontae Taylor's first with a pick six, and it's within the first 2 weeks. And that another is that we see another defensive touchdown. We see multiple defensive touchdowns from this New Orleans Saints unit throughout the season in a variety of ways. And I think both of those things, that's a difference maker in games, right? Like, I'll have to see if I can find it, but like the percentage of NFL teams that score defensive touchdowns in games, I'm sure their percentage of win is remarkably high. You score a touchdown on defense, you're probably winning that game. And so I think that that's another route that the Saints can find, along with an offense that should put some pressure on the opposing offense by being able to put points on the board, force them to be able to take deep dropbacks, force them to put the ball in the air, force them to, operate with a sense of urgency that makes them uncomfortable, all those things. So that offensive attack for the New Orleans Saints has the ability to make a large impact on what the offensive errors are made on the other side of the football. And the Saints defense have to be able to take advantage of that. But I don't think it takes them long to do that. I think this is a team that wants to take a ball away. And when you've got Dennis Allen, you've got Joe Woods, you've got Marcus Robertson, you have this really good secondary focused defensive coaching staff. You have a fantastic linebacker coach in Michael Hodges. You have an attacking, aggressive defensive line coach in Todd Grantham. That whole gumbo recipe should be one that invites a lot of opportunities to generate takeaways, especially if the offense is popping over on the opposite side. All right, y'all, I appreciate you as always. To all the everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget tomorrow's episode. We got to some of my biggest questions today. We're going to get to some of your biggest questions tomorrow, but we're going to lead everything off by taking a look at which new addition for the New Orleans Saints, draft pick, free agency addition, doesn't matter, which new addition for the New Orleans Saints will make a surprise impact in 2023. Rashid Shaheed was kind of that guy last year. Who will be that guy this year? That includes the undrafted free agents as well. So we'll get into all of that in tomorrow's episode. I appreciate you as always making Locked On Saints part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And I want to give a big shout out and happy birthday to the homie Wayne. Happy birthday, brother. Thank you so much for all the support here on the show. As always, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.